Welcome to Deduction Junction, where mysteries unfold and every detail holds a clue. Step into the brilliant mind of Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, as we journey through his most intriguing cases. With logic sharper than a razor and an eye for the smallest detail, Poirot unravels crimes that leave others baffled. Get ready to immerse yourself in a world of suspense, deception, and of course, the little gray cells. The investigation begins now. Chapter 1. The Man Who Vanished. The evening mist hung low over Berkeley Square, curling around the flickering gas lamps and swallowing the sound of carriage wheels against cobblestones. It was a night of peculiar stillness, as if London itself were holding its breath, waiting. Inside the quiet warmth of White's Club, a haven for the city's most distinguished gentlemen, a game of bridge had just concluded. The players, 4 men of wealth and influence, rose from the table, stretching and murmuring about business and politics. Among them was Mr. Alastair Montague, a retired diplomat with a reputation for discretion and charm. Montague placed his cards neatly on the polished oak table, his face betraying nothing. "A good game, gentlemen," he murmured, reaching for his brandy. His opponent, a stout banker named Cyril Weatherby, chuckled. "A better one if I had won, Montague. But luck favors you as always." Montague smiled faintly. Perhaps. The evening had been uneventful, until quite suddenly it was not. For within the hour, Alastair Montague was gone, vanished without a trace. The following morning, Hercule Poirot sat immaculately dressed in his Mayfair apartment, reading the Times with his usual precision. The scent of fresh coffee and warm croissants filled the air, while Hastings, ever his loyal companion, buttered a slice of toast with more enthusiasm than skill. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said between bites, "this is the sort of morning I enjoy. No cases, no intrigue, just a quiet breakfast." Poirot lifted an elegant brow. "Ah, mon ami. But how often does a quiet morning remain quiet?" Hastings frowned. "Well, one can hope—" A sharp knock interrupted him. Poirot, with unruffled patience, took a final sip of his coffee before rising. "You see, Hastings, the universe does not allow Hercule Poirot to rest." He opened the door, revealing Inspector Japp, his face drawn with frustration. "Morning, Poirot," Japp said, stepping inside without preamble. "I need your help. We've got a proper mystery on our hands." Poirot gestured toward a chair. "Mais bien sûr, my friend. What troubles you so early?" Japp sighed, rubbing his temples. "A man's gone missing. Alastair Montague. He was last seen at White's Club last night, around 11. Since then, nothing." Hastings straightened. "Gone? Without a trace?" Japp nodded. "Not a single soul saw him leave. It's as if he just vanished." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "And tell me, mon ami, is there reason to suspect something?" "Nefarious?" Japp hesitated. "That's the odd part. No ransom note, no sign of struggle, and, get this, his rooms at Montague House are exactly as he left them. Clothes untouched, valuables still in place. Even his breakfast was half-eaten." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most fascinating," he murmured. "Tell me, Japp, did Montague have any enemies?" Japp grimaced. "The man was a diplomat for 30 years, Poirot. I'd wager he's made plenty." Poirot tapped a thoughtful finger against the arm of his chair. "A diplomat, a gentleman of order, and yet he disappears without a trace." He stood abruptly. "Come, Hastings, we must begin at the beginning." Hastings blinked. "Where to?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "To White's Club, mon ami, where Mr. Montague was last seen." The air inside White's Club was thick with tobacco smoke and murmured conversation. The usual clientele, aristocrats, businessmen, men of influence, sat in plush leather armchairs, their expressions unreadable. Poirot and Hastings were led to the lounge by the club's manager, Mr. Aldous Henshaw, a gaunt man with an air of perpetual disapproval. "This is where Montague sat last night," Henshaw said stiffly, gesturing toward an untouched chair at the bridge table. Poirot's gaze swept over the neatly arranged cards, the half-finished glass of brandy, and the precisely stacked betting chips. He reached out, touching the chair lightly. Then he tilted his head. "Curious," he murmured. Hastings frowned. "What is?" Poirot lifted the brandy glass. "Tell me, mon cher Henshaw, when was this table cleaned?" Henshaw blinked. "It hasn't been, monsieur. We left it as it was at the inspector's request." Poirot nodded. "Ah, then we can assume that Mr. Montague left in some haste. Observe, his chair is slightly askew, not tucked in as a gentleman would normally leave it." He pointed to the betting chips. "Yet he had time to stack these perfectly, and his brandy, untouched, yet within reach." Poirot straightened. Something disturbed him before he could finish his game. Japp frowned. But disturbed him how? There was no argument, no raised voices. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but there was something." He turned to Henshaw. "Tell me, monsieur, did Montague receive any visitors last night?" Henshaw hesitated, then cleared his throat. A note was delivered to him at around 10:45. He read it, seemed thoughtful, then placed it inside his coat pocket. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And was that note recovered?" Henshaw shifted. "No." His coat was still. A quiet stillness settled over the group. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Then we have our first clue, mes amis." He turned toward Japp. "The note, mon cher. That is what we must find." As Poirot and Hastings left the club, the London fog had thickened, turning the street lamps into ghostly halos of light. Hastings tucked his hands into his coat. "What do you think, Poirot? Was Montague kidnapped?" Poirot sighed. "It is possible, mon ami, but there is one detail that troubles me." Hastings glanced at him. "What's that?" Poirot's gaze was distant. "A man who leaves of his own will takes his coat. A man who is forcibly removed leaves behind signs of struggle." He exhaled, but Montague did neither. Hastings frowned. "Then what does that mean?" Poirot turned to him, his expression unreadable. "It means, Hastings, that Mr. Montague left that room intending to return." A shiver ran down Hastings's spine, but he never did. Poirot nodded, which means that somewhere between his seat and the door, he met his silent adversary. Chapter 2. The Missing Note. The cold morning air cut through London as Poirot and Hastings arrived at Montague House, the missing diplomat's elegant town residence nestled along a quiet street in Mayfair. The house stood immaculate, its white facade untouched by the chaos of the night before. But inside, something was missing, something more than just Alastair Montague. Inspector Japp greeted them at the entrance, his coat buttoned tightly against the wind. "Well, Poirot, if you were expecting signs of a struggle, you'll be disappointed," he said, stepping aside to let them in. "Everything in this house is just as Montague left it." Poirot entered the hall, his keen gaze drifting over the surroundings. The house was precisely arranged, the furnishings modest but of undeniable quality. A polished mahogany staircase led to the upper floors, while to their left, the drawing room was pristine, too pristine. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Order is a wonderful thing, Japp, but in this case, it tells me something rather interesting." Japp folded his arms. "Oh? And what's that?" Poirot stepped lightly into the drawing room, his fingers brushing against the edge of a writing desk near the window. Nothing is disturbed. No hasty packing, no half-written correspondence abandoned in haste. Even the newspapers on the coffee table are neatly arranged. He glanced toward the inspector. "Which means, mon cher Japp, that Montague did not intend to disappear." Japp exhaled sharply. "So you're saying whatever happened to him wasn't planned?" Poirot nodded. "Exactement. A man planning to vanish leaves signs. This house, it is a portrait of routine." Hastings, who had been scanning the room, suddenly paused by the writing desk. Poirot, look at this. Poirot stepped forward as Hastings pointed to a small indentation on the desk's surface, a faint square where a paper had once rested but had since been removed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, our missing note. Japp stepped closer. So, Montague brought the note home? Poirot tapped the desk lightly. It would seem so, and yet it is gone. Tell me, Japp, did your men find any loose sheets of paper in the house? Japp shook his head. Not a scrap. Poirot clasped his hands together. Then we must ask ourselves, who removed it? The three men turned as a soft cough interrupted their thoughts. Standing near the door was a tall, wiry man dressed in the crisp uniform of a butler. His posture was unshakably formal, his face betraying no emotion. This is Mr. Grayson, Japp introduced. Montague's valet. If anyone would have seen something, it's him. Poirot studied the man carefully. Monsieur Grayson, tell me. What were your master's final movements yesterday? Grayson nodded stiffly, his voice calm. Sir returned home at approximately 7 o'clock, as he always does on the evenings he dined at his club. He took his brandy in the drawing room, read the evening papers, and retired to his study for correspondence. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did he receive any visitors? Grayson hesitated. No visitors, sir. Poirot lifted a delicate brow. Are you quite certain? Grayson's jaw tightened ever so slightly. There was a note delivered, sir, he admitted. Japp straightened. A note? What did it say? Grayson's expression remained impassive. I do not know, sir. Sir Montague read it privately. However, he seemed preoccupied afterward. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against the desk. And what did he do with this note? Grayson hesitated again. I do not know, sir. I assumed he discarded it. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Tell me, Grayson, when you entered this room this morning, was anything out of place? The valet faltered for the first time. His eyes flickered toward the desk. There was an envelope missing. Japp's brows shot up. And you didn't think to mention that? Grayson shifted uncomfortably. I did not think it significant at the time, sir. Poirot tilted his head. You are a man of precision, Monsieur Grayson. If something was out of place, I believe you would have noticed immediately. Grayson swallowed. Yes, sir. Poirot stepped forward, lowering his voice. And yet, you did not mention it. Why? A flicker of something, fear, crossed the valet's face. I assumed Sir Montague had taken it with him when he left the house. Poirot's mustache twitched. Ah, but now we know that he did not leave voluntarily. Grayson's breathing hitched. Japp narrowed his eyes. Are you hiding something, Grayson? The valet took a slow breath. No, sir. Poirot studied him in silence. Then, with a knowing smile, he said, Not yet. As Grayson excused himself, Poirot turned toward the others, his expression calculating. Hastings frowned. Do you think he's lying? Poirot smiled faintly. Not lying, Hastings. Holding something back. Japp sighed. We still don't know what was in that note. Poirot gestured toward the desk again. But we do know one thing, my friends. He picked up a silver letter opener, holding it delicately between two fingers. Someone removed that note between the time Montague vanished and this morning. That means someone in this house, or someone with access to it, knew it was important. Hastings exhaled. But who? Poirot turned toward Japp. Tell me, mon cher, have you checked Montague's correspondence? Japp nodded. Nothing unusual, just diplomatic letters, bills, and social invitations. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, but you see, sometimes, Hastings, it is not what is present that interests me.
He picked up an empty envelope from the tray. It is what is missing. Hastings peered over his shoulder. What do you mean? Poirot pointed at the top of the envelope. See here. This letter was addressed to Montague yesterday morning.
But there is no sender's name. Japp's brow furrowed. That is odd. Poirot tapped the envelope lightly. Someone did not wish to be identified. He turned it over, his sharp gaze settling on a faint smudge near the seal. Ah, Poirot murmured. Hastings, look closely. Do you see it? Hastings squinted. I don't see anything. Poirot smiled. A smudge of blue ink, my friend. And not just any ink. Japp crossed his arms. What are you getting at? Poirot set the envelope down carefully, his voice dropping to a whisper. This ink is rare, mon cher, and I know only one person in London who uses it. Japp stiffened. Who? Poirot smiled mysteriously. A man who should not have been writing to Montague at all. Chapter 3. The Man with the Blue Ink. The soft hum of London's early afternoon bustle filtered through the fog-laced streets as Hercule Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Japp left Montague House. The streets of Mayfair were quiet, the world, outside seemingly untouched by the peculiar mystery they found themselves entangled in. Yet, to Poirot, the world had changed. The smudge of blue ink on Montague's envelope was a clue, and, as with all things, Poirot knew that the smallest clue could be the most telling. Japp, Poirot said, his voice smooth. There is a certain gentleman I would very much like to visit. Japp sighed. I had a feeling you were about to suggest something. Poirot adjusted his gloves neatly. But of course. We must visit the only man in London who would have written to Montague with such ink. Hastings frowned. And who is that? Poirot smiled. The reclusive scholar, Mr. Felix Cavendish. The carriage ride to Cavendish's residence was spent in silence, save for the rhythmic clatter of hooves against cobblestones. Poirot sat with unusual stillness, his fingertips lightly pressed together in thought. Hastings, unable to contain himself, finally spoke. This Cavendish fellow, who is he? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Felix Cavendish, mon ami, is a man of letters, a historian, a collector of knowledge. He spent years working within the Foreign Office as an archivist, a position most unremarkable to many, but to me, très intéressant. Jappy snorted. A librarian, then? Poirot's mustache twitched. Ah, but one who safeguarded knowledge that men would kill for. Hastings exhaled sharply. You mean secrets? Précisément. Poirot's voice softened. And it is those secrets that may have led to the disappearance of Alistair Montague. Japp folded his arms. If that's true, let's hope Cavendish is in the mood to talk. The carriage turned onto Kensington Square, coming to a stop, before a quiet, ivy-covered townhouse. The brass plate on the door read, Felix Cavendish, historian and archivist, Poirot, stepped forward and rapped lightly on the door. A moment later, the door swung open. A thin man with pale skin and ink-stained fingers peered at them over a pair of round spectacles. His expression was unreadable, save for the sharp intelligence in his eyes. Yes? Poirot bowed slightly. Mr. Cavendish? My name is Hercule Poirot, and these are my associates, Captain Hastings and Inspector Japp. Might we have a word? Cavendish tilted his head slightly. I assume this is about Montague. Japp stiffened. So you know he's missing? Cavendish smiled faintly. When a man like Montague disappears, it does not go unnoticed. Poirot stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Then, monsieur, let us not waste time. The interior of Cavendish's study was precisely arranged, much like Poirot's own residence. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents organized with obsessive care. A large oak desk stood in the center, littered with parchments, letters, and a well-used inkwell of deep blue ink. Hastings shot Poirot a knowing glance. The ink. Poirot nodded. He turned to Cavendish, his voice polite but firm. Monsieur, you wrote to Alistair Montague yesterday, did you not? Cavendish smoothed his waistcoat absent-mindedly. I did. Japp stepped forward. What was in the letter? Cavendish hesitated. That is, Complicated. Poirot's eyes darkened. Slightly. Complications lead to danger, monsieur. Montague is missing. That letter may hold the answer. Cavendish let out a slow breath. Then, moving toward his desk, he opened a drawer and withdrew a thin sheet of parchment. Poirot and Japp leaned in as he unfolded it. The words written in elegant script were brief. Montague, we need to talk. The past is catching up. Cavendish. Hastings frowned. That's all? Cavendish nodded. It was a warning. Japp scowled. A warning about what? Cavendish's jaw tightened. About something Montague did a long time ago. Something that people haven't forgotten. Poirot's gaze narrowed. And what precisely was that? Cavendish hesitated. Then very softly he said, during his time as a diplomat, Montague was involved in an operation, a highly classified mission concerning a man named Victor Leduc. Poirot's breath caught. Victor Leduc. That name was not unfamiliar to him. Japp's expression turned grim. Leduc? I've heard that name before. Cavendish nodded. You should have. Leduc was a French double agent, a master manipulator. During the war, he played both sides, selling intelligence to the highest bidder. Poirot's fingers tightened against his cane. And what was Montague's involvement? Cavendish exhaled. Montague was tasked with handling Leduc's defection. The operation was supposed to be smooth. Leduc would provide intelligence, and in return, he'd receive protection. Poirot spoke softly. But something went wrong. Cavendish's gaze darkened. Very wrong. Leduc disappeared, just like Montague. And the intelligence he promised to hand over? Gone. Hastings whispered, You think this is all connected? Poirot nodded once. Then, before he could respond further, a loud knock rattled the study door. A messenger boy, breathless and flushed, burst in. He held a small note in his trembling hands. For Mr. Poirot, he gasped. Poirot took the note delicately. His sharp eyes scanned the words. Then he went very still. Hastings leaned in. What does it say? Poirot lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. Leduc is alive. He has Montague. If you want answers, come alone. Japp's face darkened. Good God. Poirot carefully folded the note. His voice was calm. It seems, mes amis, he murmured, that the Silent Adversary is ready to speak. Chapter 4. The Adversary Speaks. The dim glow of London's street lamps barely cut through the thick evening fog as Hercule Poirot sat in the carriage, his small, precise hands folded in his lap. Across from him, Hastings shifted uneasily, glancing at the note Poirot had received mere hours before. This is madness, Poirot, Hastings muttered. The note specifically says to come alone. Poirot arched a brow. Ah, mon ami, but you see, I am not going alone. You are with me. Hastings scowled. That's not what I meant. This could be a trap. Poirot smiled faintly. Of course it is a trap. But a trap can work two ways, n'est-ce pas? Japp, sitting beside Hastings, exhaled sharply. I don't like it either. But we can't just sit back and wait. If Montague really is alive, we need to act. Poirot tilted his head. Just so, my friend. But we must act with intelligence, with precision. He tapped his temple gently. The little grey cells must work carefully tonight. The carriage came to a halt near the docks, the heavy mist rolling in from the Thames, wrapping the old warehouses and wooden piers in an eerie stillness. A single lantern flickered weakly in the distance, illuminating the abandoned alley where the note had instructed Poirot to go. Hastings tensed. Are you sure about this, Poirot? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. One must always be sure, Hastings, even when one is not. With that, he stepped into the fog, his silhouette small but assured. Japp gave a reluctant nod. We'll stay close, just in case. Poirot strode forward, unhurried, calm, his polished shoes clicking softly against the cobblestones. Then, from the shadows, a voice emerged, low, measured. "Mr. Poirot." Poirot paused. A figure stepped forward, a man in a long, dark coat, his hat pulled low over his face. Poirot's mustache. The man let out a quiet chuckle. "I see my reputation precedes me." Poirot studied him carefully. The man had aged, but the sharpness of his gaze, the way he held himself. This was not a man who had lived in fear. This was a man who had controlled the game from the very start. Leduc leaned against the wall, half shrouded in shadow. "You are here for Montague." Poirot nodded once. "Indeed. And you are here to ensure I do not find him." Leduc smiled. "Now, why would you assume that?" Poirot lifted a hand. "Come, monsieur. Let us not play games. We are both men who appreciate strategy, no? You were believed dead for years, yet here you stand, very much alive. Montague, the man responsible for your defection, disappears. Is this coincidence?" Leduc exhaled softly. "You are sharp, Mr. Poirot. I expected nothing less." Poirot stepped forward. "Tell me, monsieur, what happened the night Montague vanished?" Leduc's jaw tightened slightly. "I sent him a message, just as I did to you." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, then you lured him, as you lured me. And once he arrived?" Leduc was silent for a moment. Then, very softly, he said, "I offered him a choice." Hastings, hidden in the nearby fog, clenched his fists. Poirot remained still. "A choice," he murmured. "And what choice was that?" Leduc smiled slightly. "To correct the past." Poirot tapped his chin. "By which you mean to give you something that was taken from you." Leduc's eyes darkened. "Something that belonged to me, Mr. Poirot. A document Montague kept hidden even from his own government. A document that could change everything." Poirot narrowed his gaze. "A document that no longer exists." Leduc stiffened. "What?" Poirot folded his arms. "I have spoken with Felix Cavendish. He knew of this document, did he not? And yet, there is no record of it, no trace. You sent Montague searching for something that was destroyed years ago." Leduc's fingers twitched. Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, monsieur, I see now. This was never about revenge. This was about restoration." Leduc's breathing had slowed. Poirot's voice dropped, steady as a chess player making his final move. "You were betrayed. Oui. Sold out before your defection was complete. Montague, he was meant to protect you, but instead, he kept a secret that cost you everything." Leduc's jaw clenched. Poirot pressed on. "You do not want Montague dead." No, that would be too simple. You want him to suffer, to admit what he did." A long silence. Then, Leduc exhaled sharply. "He is still alive." Hastings inhaled sharply from the shadows. Poirot remained calm. "And where is he?" Leduc studied him for a long moment. Then finally he turned slightly and gestured toward the darkened warehouse nearby. Poirot followed his gaze. "Inside," Leduc said. "He has been waiting." Poirot took a step forward, but Leduc lifted a hand. "But be warned, Mr. Poirot." His voice was soft. "The past does not forgive easily." Poirot tilted his head. "Nor do those who have lived in its shadow." And, with that, he walked toward the warehouse. Poirot stood before the heavy wooden door, Hastings and Japp flanking him. Japp's hand was on his revolver. "Are we sure about this?" Poirot smoothed his cuffs. "One must always be sure." Hastings took a deep breath. Poirot pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with dust and dampness, and in the center of the room, bound to a chair, was Alistair Montague. His eyes lifted slowly, weak with exhaustion. Poirot stepped forward. "Ah, Monsieur Montague," he said softly, "let us finally speak the truth." Montague's eyes widened, and then a gunshot rang through the night. Chapter 5. A shot in the dark. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the abandoned warehouse, sharp as a lightning strike. Poirot instinctively ducked, his small frame moving. With surprising speed as the sound of splintering wood filled the air, Jap cursed loudly, drawing his revolver as Hastings threw himself behind a stack of old crates. The bullet had struck just inches from Montague's chair, lodging itself into the rotting planks of the warehouse wall. For a moment, silence hung thick in the air, save for the sound of their breathing and the faint creak of rusted metal. Poirot straightened slowly, brushing dust from his sleeves. His expression was unreadable. "Ah," he murmured. "It seems someone does not wish for this conversation to continue." Jap's voice was low and urgent. "Stay here. I'll flush them out." Without waiting for approval, he darted into the shadows, his footsteps barely audible as he disappeared into the labyrinth of wooden crates and rusting scaffolding. Hastings, still crouched behind cover, exhaled sharply. "Poirot, we need to—" "Get Montague out of here." Poirot turned, his gaze sharp. "And yet, mon ami, the greater mystery lies in why the shooter aimed where they did." Hastings blinked. "What?" Poirot gestured toward the bullet hole, just inches from Montague's chair. "They did not aim for Montague," he murmured. "They aimed to miss." Montague, still tied to the chair, let out a dry, bitter laugh. "You're as sharp as they say, Poirot." Poirot tilted his head slightly. "And yet, monsieur, you remain at the center of a game where your position is most precarious." Hastings moved forward, his hands working quickly at the ropes that bound Montague's wrists. "Can you stand?" Montague winced as he moved, his body stiff from confinement. "I believe so. I've certainly endured worse." Poirot's eyes never left the bullet hole. "The shooter was not Victor Leduc." Montague went still. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You recognize the hand that held the gun, do you not?" Montague's jaw clenched. Hastings looked between them, confused. "Poirot, what are you saying?" Poirot folded his arms. "I am saying, mon cher Hastings, that the true adversary remains in the shadows. Leduc is but a player in this game, one driven by revenge. But the shot tonight?" His eyes narrowed. "That was a warning. And warnings, Hastings, are given only by those who still wish to negotiate." The sound of footsteps echoed as Jap emerged from the shadows, his revolver still raised. "Damn it, they slipped away. The fog's too thick." Poirot nodded, unsurprised. "Ah, but that is what they intended, my friend." Jap scowled. "So what now? We've got Montague. Should we get him to safety?" Montague shook his head. "No, I need to finish this." Hastings blinked. "Finish what?" Montague's gaze was unreadable. "The past." Poirot stepped forward. "Then let us begin, monsieur. You will tell us everything. From the start." Montague's shoulders tensed. "And if I don't?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Then I fear the next bullet will not miss." The four men retreated to a small, discreet hotel near the Thames, where Montague was given hot tea and a change of clothes. The weight of the night hung over them as they gathered in the dimly lit sitting room. Poirot sat directly across from Montague, his hands folded. "Begin." Montague exhaled. "Years ago, when I worked as a diplomat, I was tasked with handling the defection of Victor Leduc. It was meant to be simple. He would turn over intelligence, and we would provide him with a new identity." Hastings nodded. "Yes, Cavendish told us as much." Montague's expression darkened. "What Cavendish doesn't know is that there was another deal, one made in secret." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah," Montague rubbed his temples wearily. "Leduc had documents, proof of a mole within our own intelligence agency. But instead of handing them over, he bargained with them." Jap stiffened. "A mole?" Montague nodded. "Yes, a highly placed individual. Someone who had been feeding intelligence to the enemy for years." Poirot's voice remained quiet. "And you, monsieur? What role did you play?" Montague let out a bitter laugh. I was young, naive. I followed orders. I was told to bury it. The mole was too powerful, too well connected. My superiors believed exposing him would do more harm than good. Hastings sat forward. So you suppressed the evidence? Montague's gaze was distant. I did worse. I ensured that Leduc disappeared before he could talk. A heavy silence settled over the room. Poirot spoke softly. You betrayed him. Montague flinched. Yes. Hastings looked horrified. But if that's true, why is Leduc still alive? Montague's voice was hollow. Because someone saved him. Someone who had their own reasons for wanting to keep him alive. Poirot's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. And now, Leduc seeks justice. Montague shook his head. No, Poirot. Leduc wants blood. Japp exhaled. All right, we know Leduc's motive. We know Montague was a pawn in something bigger. But there's still one thing we don't know. Poirot's brow lifted. And that is? Japp's voice was grim. Who fired that shot tonight? Montague was silent. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Monsieur, you know who it was. Montague's hands tightened into fists. Yes, Poirot leaned in. Then tell us, mon cher. Montague's voice was barely a whisper. It was the mole. Hastings froze. You mean, he's still alive? Montague nodded slowly. Poirot's voice was soft, but edged like steel. Then it seems, mes amis, that the true adversary has yet to reveal himself. A chill ran through the room. Outside, the fog swirled against the windows, pressing in like an unseen presence. Somewhere hidden in the darkness, a silent enemy watched. Waiting. Chapter 6. The Shadow of the Mole. The lamplight flickered faintly in the quiet hotel room, casting long, uncertain shadows along the paneled walls. Poirot sat impeccably composed, his hands resting neatly on the armrest of his chair. Across from him, Alistair Montague appeared aged beyond his years, his shoulders slightly slumped, the weight of his past bearing down upon him. Japp stood near the window, peering out cautiously at the mist-covered street below. We need a name, Montague, he said gruffly. If the mole's still alive, we need to bring him in before he makes another move. Montague's fingers tightened against the edge of his chair. Bringing him in won't be easy, he murmured. He's had years to cover his tracks. He's still protected. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, monsieur. But a man who has lived in the shadows for so long, he must have left traces, no? Montague's jaw tightened. You don't understand. This man, he's untouchable. Japp let out an impatient breath. Let us be the judge of that. Give us his name. Montague's lips parted, then hesitated. His gaze flickered toward the window, as if fearing unseen eyes. Then finally, he spoke. Sir Reginald Whitmore. A thick silence settled over the room. Hastings, who had been listening intently, sat up straighter. Whitmore, the former Director of Intelligence. Montague nodded slowly. The very same. Japp swore under his breath. You're telling me that the man who was supposed to be keeping the country's secrets was the one selling them? Montague exhaled heavily. Yes. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly. And yet, monsieur, you said you were ordered to suppress the evidence of a mole. By whom? Montague's eyes flickered with something unreadable. By Whitmore himself. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against the chair's armrest. Ah, but of course. The perfect crime, Hastings, is one in which the investigator is also the guilty party. Hastings let out a breath. Good Lord. That's why Leduc was silenced, wasn't it? He knew the truth. Montague nodded grimly. He had proof. But before he could use it, Whitmore ensured that he vanished. Poirot's gaze darkened. And now, monsieur, Leduc has returned, to settle an old debt. Jap ran a hand through his hair. All right, let's say Whitmore's behind this. Let's say he's the one who tried to scare us off with that shot last night. What's his next move? Poirot steepled his fingers. The answer, mon cher Jap, is quite simple. He will try to erase all remaining evidence of his betrayal. Hastings frowned. You mean he'll try to kill Montague? Poirot gave a slight nod. Precisely. Montague shifted uneasily. Then I need to get out of London. Poirot lifted a hand. No, my dear monsieur. That is exactly what he expects you to do. Jap crossed his arms. Then what do you suggest? Poirot smiled faintly. We shall make it appear as though Montague has fled, and in doing so we shall draw out the fox. Hastings blinked. You mean use Montague as bait? Montague stiffened. Absolutely not, Poirot sighed. Ah, but consider, monsieur, you have spent your life running. Would it not be better to end this game once and for all? Montague hesitated. He looked at Poirot, then at Jap, then finally he nodded reluctantly. All right. What's the plan? Poirot smiled. By the following afternoon, whispers had already begun to spread. The rumor was carefully planted. Montague was preparing to flee the country. A ticket for an evening train to Dover was purchased in his name and delivered to a well-placed source in the Foreign Office. It did not take long for Sir Reginald Whitmore to respond. That evening, at precisely 7 o'clock, a telegram was delivered to Montague's hotel. Hastings read it aloud. Mr. Montague, I understand you seek a quiet resolution. Let us meet this evening at my residence. We shall speak plainly, without the burden of the past. Sir Reginald Whitmore Jap let out a low whistle. The old fox took the bait. Montague tensed. You don't believe he actually means to negotiate, do you? Poirot shook his head. Non, monsieur. What he seeks is control. What he fears is exposure. Hastings swallowed hard. So, he'll try to kill you? Poirot tilted his head. If he is desperate enough, yes. Montague's face darkened. Then why the devil would I go? Poirot smiled faintly. Because, mon cher, you shall not go alone. He turned to Jap. Do you have men stationed near Whitmore's home? Jap nodded. I'll have them in place before nightfall. Poirot clasped his hands together. Bon. Then tonight we shall expose the mole. The carriage rolled through the darkened streets, heading towards Sir Reginald Whitmore's grand estate in Belgrave Square. Poirot, Hastings, and Montague sat in tense silence, the weight of the evening pressing upon them. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. I don't like this. Walking into the lion's den. It's suicide. Poirot smoothed his cuffs. Ah, but Hastings, one must remember, a lion who knows he is being hunted often makes mistakes. Montague exhaled. And if he doesn't? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then, mon ami, we shall make him. The carriage pulled up to Whitmore's estate, its ornate iron gates looming in the darkness. A single lantern flickered near the entrance. Poirot stepped down onto the cobbled path. He turned to Jap's men, who were hidden in the surrounding shadows. Wait for my signal, he murmured. Jap gave a tight nod. Poirot turned toward Montague. It is time. Together they walked toward the door. Inside, Sir Reginald Whitmore was waiting, and the final game had begun. Chapter 7. A Meeting with the Mole. The grand doors of Sir Reginald Whitmore's estate loomed ahead, polished brass fixtures gleaming, under the dim glow of the gas lamps. A butler, tall and impassive, opened the door without a word, stepping aside to allow Poirot, Montague, and Hastings inside. The entrance hall was immaculate, a portrait of wealth and carefully curated elegance. A large chandelier hung overhead, casting soft, fractured light across the gleaming marble floor. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock chimed 7 times, the slow, deliberate toll of each chime sending an uneasy ripple through the silence. Poirot's sharp eyes swept over their surroundings. Everything in the house was arranged with meticulous precision, and yet, despite the grandeur, there was an unmistakable chill in the air. Sir Reginald Whitmore was already waiting. The man stood near the fireplace, his silver hair combed neatly back, his tailored suit a perfect fit for his unshakable air of authority. He was a man who had spent his life in power, a man who was used to being feared and obeyed. And yet, Poirot noted, his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. "Of brandy?" "Ah," Whitmore murmured, his voice smooth, calculated. "Mr. Montague, I must admit I was surprised to receive your message." Montague's jaw tightened. "Not as surprised as I was to receive yours." Whitmore smiled faintly, though the warmth never reached his eyes. "Come now, let's not be dramatic. We are both men of diplomacy, are we not? There is no need for hostility." Poirot tilted his head slightly, watching every nuance of Whitmore's movements. "Diplomacy, monsieur?" he murmured. "It is an interesting word, no? For it suggests that there are two sides negotiating." Whitmore took a slow sip of his drink, unfazed. "And are there not?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Perhaps, monsieur. But if that is the case, I must ask, what is it that you seek to negotiate?" Whitmore exhaled lightly, setting his glass down on the marble mantelpiece. "Peace, Mr. Poirot. I wish to ensure that what happened in the past remains in the past." Montague let out a dry, bitter laugh. "How convenient. You mean you want to silence me?" Whitmore's expression did not change. "That is an unkind interpretation." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah. Then tell me, Sir Reginald, was the bullet last night also a gesture of peace?" A faint flicker of something passed through Whitmore's gaze. Not shock, not denial, but something far more telling, a moment of hesitation. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "It is quite simple, monsieur."
"You gave the order to have Montague killed." Whitmore's fingers twitched against the rim of his glass. "That is a bold accusation." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not so bold, I think, for the truth, you see, is already written, in the ink."
"Of history," Whitmore tilted his head slightly. "You speak in riddles, Mr. Poirot." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "No, monsieur. I speak in facts, and the fact remains. You knew Montague had returned. You knew that if he were to speak, your carefully constructed house of cards would collapse." Whitmore remained silent, unreadable. Poirot continued, his voice as smooth as silk. "You were the one who orchestrated the betrayal of Victor Leduc. You sold intelligence to the enemy while pretending to protect your own. And when Leduc threatened to expose you, you ensured his disappearance." Whitmore's grip tightened on his glass. "Be careful, Mr. Poirot. These are dangerous accusations." Poirot's expression did not waver. "Then tell me, monsieur, where were you on the night that Alistair Montague vanished?" For the first time, Whitmore hesitated. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Your silence, monsieur, is most telling." Whitmore let out a slow breath. "I do not deny that I have enemies, Mr. Poirot. But enemies, as you well know, do not always deal in truths." Hastings scowled. "You're trying to turn this around? You nearly had Montague killed." Whitmore lifted a calm, amused brow. "Nearly, Mr. Hastings. And yet, he is still alive." Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, but that is what interests me most, monsieur." Whitmore's expression remained carefully neutral. Poirot continued. "You have killed before, that much I do not doubt. And yet, the shot that rang out last night, it was not meant to kill. It was meant to frighten." Whitmore said nothing. Poirot's gaze darkened. "Which tells me, Sir Reginald, that despite all your efforts, despite all your power, you are afraid." Whitmore's lips thinned. "Do not presume to know me, Mr. Poirot." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oh, but I do, monsieur. You are a man who has spent his life playing chess with people's lives, oui? A move here, a sacrifice there. But now, the game is nearing its end. Whitmore's jaw clenched. Montague spoke. For the first time, his voice low and steady. You can't escape this, Whitmore. The truth will come out. Leduc, he's alive. He's looking for you. Whitmore's gaze flickered, just for a second, and Poirot saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible reaction. Poirot's voice was soft but razor-sharp. Ah, he murmured. Then Leduc has already found you, has he not? Whitmore's silence was deafening. Jap, standing near the door, took a step forward. That's it then. I'll have my men take you into custody. But before he could move, Whitmore smiled, faintly, and with measured calm he reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a single envelope. Poirot's eyes locked onto it instantly. Whitmore held it out. If you wish to know the full truth, Mr. Poirot, you will need to read this. Poirot took the envelope carefully, his fingers brushing over the seal. Inside was a letter signed by Victor Leduc, a letter that contained one final secret, and, as Poirot read it, his expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened, for now, at last, he knew. The final game had begun. Chapter 8. The Secret in the Letter. The faint rustle of parchment filled the air as Poirot carefully unfolded the letter. His sharp, unwavering gaze traced each line of script, his eyes moving with measured precision. The room around him seemed to hold its breath, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken challenge. Whitmore stood calmly, watching Poirot, with a faint, unreadable smile. Montague's hands clenched into fists at his sides, while Hastings shifted restlessly, unable to contain his impatience. Jap, ever the practical man, frowned at the scene before him. Well, Jap finally demanded. What does it say? Poirot did not look up immediately. Instead, he folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table beside him. Then, in a voice calm and deliberate, he spoke. This, mes amis, is not merely a letter. He tapped the folded paper gently. This is a confession. Montague's breath caught. A confession? Poirot nodded. Indeed. He turned his gaze to Whitmore. But not, I think, in the way you had hoped, Sir Reginald. Whitmore's expression did not waver. Oh, Poirot smoothed his cuffs. You are a man who has always played the long game, n'est-ce pas? A man who understands the value of waiting, of striking at the precise moment. He gestured to the letter. And yet, monsieur, I fear you have waited too long. He picked up the parchment again and read aloud. To the one who reads this, if I am gone, then know this. I was betrayed not once but twice. The man I trusted, the man who swore to protect me, was my greatest enemy. But the man who truly delivered my fate was another. The one who ordered my silence was not Whitmore. The room froze. Hastings stared. What? Poirot continued reading. Whitmore is guilty, yes. But his betrayal was only self-serving. He acted to cover his own sins, to erase his mistakes. But the one who wished me dead, the one who ensured I could never speak, was Montague. A sharp intake of breath filled the room. Montague went pale. That's a lie, Jap turned to him sharply. Is it? Montague shook his head furiously. I did what I was told. I was following orders. Poirot's eyes darkened. Ah, monsieur, but the question is, whose orders? Montague stammered. I don't know, I swear. I was given instructions. Poirot stepped forward, his voice quiet, but unyielding. Leduc does not lie, monsieur. Montague's breathing was unsteady. I never meant for him to die. Poirot lifted a hand. And yet, you signed the order for his execution. A horrified silence settled over the room. Montague's hands trembled. You don't understand." Poirot shook his head. "Ah, but I do. You see, Montague, there is something you have forgotten." He stepped closer, his voice razor-sharp. "You did not simply follow orders. You made a choice." Montague closed his eyes. I was scared." Poirot nodded. "Of course. Fear is a powerful thing, n'est-ce pas?" Then, softly, he asked, "But tell me, monsieur, was it fear that guided your hand when you signed that order?" Montague flinched. The room fell into deep silence. Hastings exhaled slowly. So Montague was the real traitor? Poirot's gaze flickered toward Whitmore. "No, mon ami. Whitmore is guilty of much, but he is not the only villain in this tale." Whitmore tilted his head slightly. "How fascinating." Poirot turned back to Montague. "The truth, monsieur. Tell us." Montague's eyes glistened with something unreadable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I thought I could live with it." Poirot nodded. "And now, you see, you cannot." Montague swallowed hard. "Le Duc, he never forgave me." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Would you have forgiven yourself?" Montague said nothing. Jap sighed heavily. "So what now?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Now, mes amis, we finish the game." As they left Whitmore's house, the cool night air hit them, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. Poirot walked in measured steps, his mind working through the final pieces of the puzzle. Hastings fell into step beside him. "Poirot, if Le Duc is alive, why hasn't he come forward?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Hastings. That is the question, n'est-ce pas?" Hastings nodded. "So, what's the answer?" Poirot smiled. "We shall ask him ourselves." Hastings blinked. "You mean you know where he is?" Poirot stepped into the waiting carriage. "Mais oui. For you see, mon cher Hastings, Le Duc has been watching us all along." Jap's eyes widened. "What?" Poirot settled into his seat. "Tomorrow, mes amis, we shall meet the ghost himself." Hastings swallowed hard, and somewhere, in the darkness, Victor Le Duc was waiting. Chapter 9. The Man Who Returned from the Dead. The following morning, London lay under a thick veil of fog, the city's usual rhythm muted beneath the dense mist. The streets appeared blurred, softened, as though the world itself had grown uncertain. Hercule Poirot sat quietly in the carriage, his fingers steepled together, his mind focused on the delicate web of deception that had brought them to this moment. Across from him, Hastings sat fidgeting, his brows knit in deep confusion. "This doesn't sit right with me, Poirot," he muttered. "If Le Duc is alive, why hasn't he shown himself?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Ah, mon cher." "Hastings, but he has." Hastings blinked. "He has?" Poirot nodded. "In every shadow, in every step we have taken, Le Duc has been watching, waiting." Jap, sitting next to them, let out a heavy breath. "And you're sure about this?" Poirot tilted his head. "You doubt me, mon ami," Jap grumbled. "I don't like ghosts, and I certainly don't like being played for a fool." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then let us put an end to this mystery." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a single note, crisp and precise. The message, scribbled in sharp, deliberate script, read, "St. Dunstan's Clock Tower, noon, come alone." Hastings read it aloud. "Le Duc sent this?" Poirot folded it carefully. "He did." Jap frowned. "It could be a trap." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oh, mon ami, it most certainly is." The towering Gothic spire of St. Dunstan's stood like a silent sentinel against the grey London sky, its iron clock hands frozen at 5 minutes to noon. The fog curled thickly around the base of the tower, distorting shapes, blurring the line between reality and illusion. Poirot stepped forward alone, his small figure barely visible in the mist. His patent leather shoes clicked softly against the cobbled courtyard as he approached the appointed place. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, eyes sharp with an intelligence that had not dulled despite the passing years. Poirot stood very still. Victor Leduc had finally come out of hiding. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, in a voice as smooth as glass, Leduc said, "I must admit, Mr. Poirot, I expected you much sooner." Poirot's lips curled slightly. "Ah, but timing, monsieur, is everything." Leduc let out a quiet chuckle. "And you have always preferred to strike at the exact moment." Poirot's eyes did not waver. "As do you." Leduc took a step forward, his presence eerily calm. "You are here for answers." Poirot nodded once. "And you, monsieur? You are here for justice." Leduc tilted his head slightly. "Justice?" He gave a low chuckle. "Is that what you call it?" Poirot watched him carefully. "And what would you call it?" Leduc's smile did not reach his eyes. "A reckoning." Leduc walked slowly, his hands folded behind his back, his movements controlled, deliberate. "Imagine Montague has already told you part of the story," he murmured. Poirot inclined his head. "Enough to understand the betrayal." Leduc exhaled. "Betrayal." He repeated the word softly, tasting it. "Yes, that is the word, is it not?" Poirot remained silent. Leduc continued. "I was promised protection, a way out, a future." He laughed bitterly. "But what did I receive? A bullet, a death sentence." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet, monsieur, you did not die." Leduc's eyes glinted. "No, Poirot, I did not." Poirot's voice was quiet. "Who saved you?" Leduc's gaze darkened. "A man who wanted something more than my death." Poirot raised a brow. "And that was?" Leduc smiled faintly. "The truth." A long silence passed. Poirot's mind worked rapidly, assembling the final pieces of the puzzle. "Then tell me, monsieur, what is the final truth?" Leduc took a slow breath. Then, softly, he said, "Montague was not the only traitor." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Leduc's expression remained unreadable. "Montague signed the order." "Yes, but he was a pawn, the true mastermind. His voice dropped to a whisper. Was Whitmore." Poirot stilled. Leduc continued. "You were right, Poirot. Whitmore never intended to silence me out of fear. He did it out of strategy." Poirot's gaze darkened. "Because you knew something far greater." Leduc nodded. "Something that would tear apart everything." Poirot exhaled sharply. A second mole. Leduc smiled faintly. "Now you see." Poirot's mind raced. Whitmore had played them all, the perfect deception, a double betrayal, orchestrated to erase every witness. And now only two men remained. Poirot spoke softly. "Who?" Leduc's expression did not change. "You already know, Poirot." Poirot's voice was steady. "Say it." Leduc took a slow breath, and then, in a voice cold and quiet, he uttered the name. The name that changed everything. The name of the true traitor. Somewhere in the distance, the clock tower chimed noon. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The game had finally revealed its last hidden move. Hastings, waiting anxiously beyond the fog, saw Poirot emerging from the mist, his expression grim, resolute. "Poirot?" Hastings asked. "What happened? What did Leduc say?" Poirot adjusted, his gloves carefully. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "We have been looking at the wrong enemy, Hastings." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned toward him, his gaze piercing. The true traitor is still within our circle. Hastings felt a chill run down his spine. Good Lord, Poirot smiled faintly. Shall we finish the game, mon ami? Chapter 10. The Final Betrayal. The streets of London were quiet as Poirot and Hastings rode back toward their hotel, the weight of Leduc's revelation hanging between them like an unspoken verdict. The lamps flickered dimly in the thick fog, casting long, wavering shadows along the cobbled pavement. Hastings, ever restless, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Poirot, you said the true traitor was still within our circle. But you haven't said who. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Patience, mon ami. We are nearly there. Jap, sitting across from them, let out a grunt. If you've got it figured out, Poirot, now would be a fine time to share. Poirot tilted his head slightly. Ah, but do you not see, Chief Inspector? The answer has been before us from the start. Hastings leaned forward. You mean Whitmore? Poirot sighed. Non, Hastings. Whitmore was a player, yes, but not the Grandmaster. The true mastermind has always been the one who stood just behind him. Hastings stared at him. Who then? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The true traitor is Felix Cavendish. A stunned silence followed. Hastings gaped. Cavendish? The man who gave us Whitmore's files? Poirot nodded. Yes, mon cher. And does that not seem strange to you? Jap frowned. You think he was feeding us information on Whitmore to protect himself? Poirot smiled faintly. Precisely. He was diverting our attention away from himself, nudging us toward an obvious villain while he remained in the shadows. Hastings rubbed his temples. But why, Poirot? Why would Cavendish betray his own country? Poirot steepled his fingers. Because, my dear Hastings, he always had. An hour later, Poirot, Jap, and Hastings stood inside Cavendish's study, its grand mahogany desk bathed in the warm glow of a crackling fireplace. Felix Cavendish sat across from them, his demeanor cool, unreadable. My dear Poirot, he said, a small smirk tugging at his lips. To what do I owe the pleasure? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Ah, monsieur, but we are past pleasantries, are we not? Cavendish arched a brow. Are we? Jap crossed his arms. You can drop the act. We know everything. Cavendish leaned back, utterly composed. Is that so? And what, pray, do you think you know? Poirot stepped forward. We know that you, monsieur, were the true mole. Cavendish's smile did not falter. Intriguing. And your proof? Poirot spread his hands. Your own actions, monsieur. You gave us Whitmore knowing we would chase him like hounds on a scent. You played the perfect ally, the trusted advisor, and yet, all along, you were orchestrating the greatest deception of all. Cavendish's fingers drummed lightly on the desk. An interesting theory, Poirot. Poirot nodded. Indeed, but one does not convict on theory alone. Hastings blinked. Then what do we have? Poirot smiled faintly. We have Leduc's letter. For the first time, Cavendish's expression flickered. Poirot pressed on. Yes, monsieur. Leduc knew the truth. He had always known. That is why you tried so desperately to eliminate him. That is why you ensured he was dead all those years ago. Cavendish exhaled sharply. I had nothing to do with Leduc's disappearance. Poirot tapped his temple. Ah, bah. Poirot's voice softened, but his words were razor-sharp. Because you are the one who saved him. A sharp intake of breath filled the room. Jap's eyes widened. What? Hastings looked stunned. Cavendish saved Leduc? Poirot nodded. Think. Mes amis. Who else had the power to make Leduc disappear? Who else had access to the files, the connections, the ability to erase a man from existence? Cavendish's lips pressed into a thin line. Poirot took another step forward. You knew, Cavendish. You knew that if Whitmore was exposed, you would not be far behind. So you made your move first. Cavendish's expression turned cold. Jap, reached for his revolver. That's enough. Felix Cavendish, I'm placing you under arrest for espionage and treason. Cavendish chuckled softly. Treason? My dear Jap, you do not understand the game you are playing. Poirot smiled thinly. Ah, but that is where you are wrong, monsieur. He gestured toward the door. 2 uniformed officers entered the room. Jappy grinned. You see, Cavendish, while you were busy talking, we were busy preparing. Cavendish's jaw tightened. Poirot inclined his head. It is over. For the first time, Cavendish's composure cracked, and then, with a sigh, he muttered, Well, it was a good game while it lasted. An hour later, back at their hotel, Hastings poured himself a stiff drink, shaking his head in disbelief. I still can't believe it, Poirot. Cavendish, of all people. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon cher Hastings, the most dangerous enemies are always those who hide in plain sight. Jap, nursing his own drink, grunted. We'll have him in custody before sunrise, but I'll... Be honest, Poirot. Without you, we never would have seen it. Poirot inclined his head. It is always the details, my friend. The small inconsistencies, the subtle lies. Hastings exhaled. And Leduc? What happens to him? Poirot's expression turned thoughtful. He has lived in the shadows for too long. Perhaps now he may finally step into the light. Jappy chuckled. Well, one thing's for sure. This is a case I won't be forgetting anytime soon. Poirot smiled. Nor shall I, Chief Inspector. He lifted his teacup, a satisfied glint in his eye. For, as I have always said, the truth, in the end, always reveals itself.